and record. Yes. Great. Thank you, Marilyn. Now today, did anyone read the 4 chapters?
Yep. Does anyone remember?
I'm
No.
surprised that so many did.
I did not.
Okay. All right. All right.
Uh-oh,
Let's
frozen.
read the 4 chapters. It's a lot of reading, but I think it is helpful as we go through the class today.
Where are we on?
So hold on. I'll tell you. Hold on. We are reading Judges chapter 13, 14, 15, and 16. Judges chapter 13, 14, 15, and 16.
Judges 13, 14, and 16.
13,
okay,
14, 15, and 16.
Got it.
Okay. Now
I
let me
got
see. These are long chapters. Dorothy, welcome back. Glad you're back home.
You're on mute, Dorothy.
Yes. George, do you want to read chapter 13?
Unmute.
Sure.
George, you read chapter 13. Hold on a minute, Bryce. I'm going to let you read the last part. George, you read chapter 13. Now, who else is there? Who else? Deacon,
I'll read
you
one.
read chapter 14.
I cannot read, that's for sure.
Deacon, you read chapter 14. Lisa, you want to read? Or
I can't, yes.
Lisa, you read chapter 15.
The whole thing?
Wow.
Okay.
Now, Bryce, because this is the longest chapter, I'm going to cut this in half. Bryce, you read chapter 16, verses 1 to 15.
Mm-hmm.
And who wants to read the last part? Linda. Linda, you read from verse 17 to the end. So you got it?
Got it.
Yep.
All right. George, can you start us off, please? Thank you.
The Israelites again offended the Lord, who therefore delivered them into the power of the Philistines for 40 years. There was a certain man from Zorah, of the clan of the Danites, whose name was Manoah. His wife was barren and had borne no children. An angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, "Though you are barren and have had no children, yet you will conceive and bear a son. Now then, be careful to take no wine or strong drink, and to eat nothing unclean. As for the son you will conceive and bear, no razor shall touch his head, for this boy is to be consecrated to God from the womb. It is he who will begin the deliverances of Israel from the power of the Philistines." The woman went and told her husband, "A man of God came to me. He had the appearance of an angel of God, terrible indeed. I did not ask him where he came from, nor did he tell me his name. But he said to me, 'You will be with child and will bear a son. So take neither wine nor strong drink, and eat nothing unclean. For the boy shall be consecrated to God from the womb until the day of his death.' Manoah then prayed to the Lord. 'O Lord, I beseech you,' he said, 'may the man of God whom you sent return to us to teach us what to do for the boy who will be born.' God heard the prayer of Manoah, and the angel of God came again to the woman as she was sitting in the field. Since her husband Manoah was not with her, the woman ran in haste and told her husband, 'The man who came to me the other day has appeared to me,' she said to him. So Manoah got up and followed his wife. When he reached the man, he said to them, 'Are you the one who spoke to my wife?' 'Yes,' he answered. Then Manoah asked, 'Now, when that which you say comes true, what are we expected to do for the boy?' The angel of the Lord answered Manoah, your wife is to abstain from all things of which I spoke to her. She must not eat anything that comes from the vine, nor take wine or strong drink, nor eat anything unclean. Let her observe all that I have commanded her. Then Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, can we persuade you to stay while we prepare a cake for you? But the angel of the Lord answered Manoah, although you press me, I will not partake of your food. But if you will, you may offer a holocaust to the Lord. Not knowing that it was an angel of the Lord, Manoah said to him, what is your name? That we may honor you when your words come true. The angel of the Lord answered him, why do you ask my name, which is mysterious? Then Manoah took the kid with a cereal offering and offered it on the rock to the Lord, whose works are mysteries. While Manoah and his wife were looking on, as the flame rose to the sky from the altar, the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame of the altar. When Manoah and his wife saw this, they fell prostrate to the ground. But the angel of the Lord was seen no more by Manoah and his wife. Then Manoah, realizing that it was an angel of the Lord, said to his wife, we will certainly die, for we have seen God. But his wife pointed out to him, if the Lord had meant to kill us, he would not have accepted a holocaust and cereal offering from our hands. Nor would he have let us see all this just now, or hear what we have heard. The woman bore a son and named him Samson. The boy grew up, and the Lord blessed him. The Spirit of the Lord first stirred in him in Menahadan, which is between Zorah and Eshcatol.
Thank you, George.
Deacon
Who's
Allen.
next? Deacon Allen, chapter 14.
Okay.
Thank
Are
you.
you ready?
Yep.
Okay. Samson traveled down to Timnah. While he was in Timnah, a Philistine woman caught his eye. He went back home and told his father and mother, the Philistine woman in Timnah caught my eye. Now get her for me as a wife. But his father and mother replied to him, is there no woman among your own relatives or among all our people that you have to go get a wife from that uncircumcised Philistines? Yet Samson said to his father, get her for me, because she's the one I want. His father and mother didn't know that the Lord was behind this. He was looking for an opening with the Philistines because they were ruling over Israel at that time. Then Samson traveled down to Timnah with his father and mother. When he came to the vineyards in Timnah, suddenly, a lone young lion came roaring to meet him. The Lord's spirit rushed over him. I'm sorry.
You're at verse 6,
Yes.
Deacon.
The Lord's spirit rushed over him, and he tore the lion apart with his bare hands as one might tear apart a young goat. But he didn't tell his father or mother what he had done. Then he traveled down and talked with a woman. She was the one Samson wanted. After a while, he came back again to marry her. He turned aside to look at the lion's remains, and there was a swarm of bees with honey inside the lion's skeleton. He scooped the honey into his hands, eating it as he continued along. When he got to his father and mother, he gave some to them, and they ate it too. but he didn't tell them that he had scooped the honey from the lion's skeleton. His father traveled down to the woman, and Samson put him on a feast there, as was the custom for young men. When the town people saw him, they selected 30 companions to be with him. Then Samson said to them, "Let me tell you a riddle. If you can figure it out and tell me the answer within the 7 days of the feast, I'll give you 30 linen robes and 30 sets of clothes. But if you can't tell me the answer, then it's you who have to give me 30 linen robes and 30 sets of clothes." So they replied to him, "Tell your riddle. Let's hear it." He said to them, "Out of the eater there came something to eat. Out of the strong there came something sweet. Out for 30 days they couldn't tell the answer to the riddle. On the 4th day they said to Samson's wife, 'Seduce your husband so he'll tell us the answer to the riddle, or else we'll set fire to you and your household. Were we invited here just to become poor?' So Samson's wife cried on his shoulder and said, 'You hate me. You don't love me. You told a riddle to my people, but didn't tell me the answer.' He replied to her, 'Look, I haven't even told the answer to my father and mother. Why should I tell it to you?' But she cried on his shoulder for the rest of the 7 days of the feast. Finally, on the 7th day, he told her the answer, for she had nagged him, and she told her people the answer to the riddle. So on the 7th day, before the sun set, the townspeople said to him, 'What's sweeter than honey? What's stronger than a lion?' He replied to them, 'If you hadn't plowed with my heifer, you wouldn't have figured out my riddle.' Then the Lord's Spirit rushed over him, and he went down to Ashkelon. He killed 30 of their men, stripped them of their gear, and gave the sets of clothes to the ones who had told the answer to the riddle. In anger, he went back to his father's household, and Samson's wife married one of those who had been his companions."
Well, that's interesting.
Hard to follow that up.
That was interesting. Okay. I'm not sure what happened there, but okay.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Okay, Samson defeats the Philistines. After a while, at the time of wheat harvest, Samson went to visit his wife with a kid, and he said, "I will go into my wife in the chamber." But her father would not allow him to go in. And her father said, "I really thought that you utterly hated her. So I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister fairer than she? Please take her instead." And Samson said to them, "This time I shall be blameless in regard to the Philistines when I do them mischief." So Samson went and caught 300 foxes and took torches, and he turned them tail to tail and put a torch between each pair of tails. And when he had set fire to the torches, he let the foxes go into the standing grain of the Philistines and burned up the shocks and the standing grain, as well as the olive orchards. Then the Philistines said, "Who has done this?" And they said, "Samson, the son-in-law of Timnite, because he has taken his wife and given her to his companion." And the Philistines came up and burned her. And the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. And Samson said to them, "If this is what you do, I swear I will be avenged upon you, and after that I will quit." And he struck them hip and thigh with great slaughter, and he went down and stayed in the cleft of the rock at Etam. Then the Philistines came up and encamped in Judah and made a raid on Lehi. And the men of Judah said, "Why have you come up against us?" They said, "We have come up to bind Samson to do to him as he did to us." Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock in Edom and said to Samson, "Do you not know that the Philistines are rulers over us? What then is this that you have done to us?" And he said to them, As they did to me, so have I done to them. And they said to him, We have come down to bind you so that we may give you into the hands of the Philistines. And Samson said to them, Swear to me that you will not fall upon me yourselves. They said to him, No, we will only bind you and give you into their hands. We will not kill you. So they bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. When he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting to meet him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him. And the ropes which were on his arms became as flax that has caught fire, and his bonds melted off his hands. And he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey and put out his hands and seized it. And with it he slew 1,000 men. And Samson said, With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey have I slain 1,000 men. When he had finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone out of his hand, and the place was called Ramoth-Lehi. And he was very thirsty, and he called on the Lord and said, You have granted this great deliverance by the hand of your servant, and shall I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? And God split open the hollow place that is at Lehi, and there came water from it. And when he drank, his spirit returned, and he revived. Therefore, the name of it was called Enhakkore. It is at Lehi to this day. And he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years.
Okay. Go ahead, Bryce. Thank you, Lisa.
Samson went to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute, and went to bed with her. When the Gazanites heard that Samson was there, they surrounded that place and waited in an ambush for him. All that night at the city gate, they kept quiet all night, saying, Let's wait until dawn. Then we will kill him. But Samson stayed in bed only until midnight. Then he got up and took hold of the doors of the city gate, along with 2 gate posts, and pulled them out, bar and all. He put them on his shoulders and took them to the top of the mountain to overlook Hebron. Sometime later, he fell in love with a woman named Delilah, who lived in the Strophan Valley. The Philistine leaders went to her and said, Persuade him to tell you where his great strength comes from, so we can overpower him, tie him up, and make him helpless. Each of us then give you 1,100 pieces of silver. So Delilah said to Samson, Please tell me, where does your great strength come from? How can someone tie you up and make you helpless? Samson told her, If they tie me up with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I will become weak and be like another man. The Philistines' leaders brought her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she tied him up with them. While the men in the ambush were waiting in her room, she called out to him, Samson, the Philistines are here. But he snapped the bowstrings, and a strain of yarn snaps when it touches fire. The secret of his strength remained unknown. Then Delilah said to Samson, You have mocked me and told me lies. Won't you please tell me how you can be tied up? He told her, If they tie me up with new ropes that have never been used, I will become weak and be like other men. Delilah took new ropes and tied him up with them, and shouted, Samson, the Philistine, are here. But while the men were in the ambush waiting in her room, he snapped the ropes off his arms like a thread. Then Delilah said to Samson, You have mocked me all along and toiled me lies. Tell me, how can you be tied up? He told her, if you have weaned the 7 bards on my head into the fabric on a loom. She fastened the brands with pins and called him, Samson, the Philistines are here. He awoke from his sleep and pulled out the pin with the loom and the web. How can you say I love you? She told him, when your heart is not with me. This is the 3rd time you have mocked me and not told me what makes your strength so great.
Thank you. Go ahead, Linda. Thank you, Grace.
With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. So he told her everything. No razor has ever been used on my head, he said, because I have been a Nazarite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man. When Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines, come back once more, he has told me everything. So the rulers of Philistine returned with silver in their hands. After putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair. So she began to subdue him, and his strength left him. Then she called, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He awoke from his sleep and thought, I'll go out as before and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. When the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza. Binding him with bronze shackles, they set him to grinding grain in the prison. But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. Now the rulers of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon their god, and to celebrate, saying, our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, unto our hands. When the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, and the one who has laid waste to our land and multiplied our slain. When they were while they were in high spirits, they shouted, bring out Samson to entertain us. So they called Samson out of the prison, and he performed for them. When they stood him among the pillars, Samson said to the servant who held his hand, put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, so that I may lean against them. Now the temple was crowded with men and women. All rulers of the Philistines were there, and on the roof there were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. Then Samson prayed to the Lord, sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more, and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Then Samson reached toward the 2 central pillars on which the temple stood. Bracing himself against them, his right hand on one and his left hand on the other, Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. Then he pushed with all his might. Down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than when he lived. When his brothers and his father's whole family went down to get him, then his brothers and his father's whole family went down to get him. They brought him back and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah, his father. He had led Israel 20 years.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Welcome, Pam. And if you're looking to where we are reading Judges. We just finished reading Judges chapters 13 to 16.
You're muted, Pam.
Wow.
So we got through it. 4 chapters. Good. Who can't say they can't read 4 chapters a day for God? You know, there we did it. We did it.
Now
Yeah,
now we
we
have to
did
talk
it. We
about
did
it.
it. Now, well, obviously, the interesting chapter is chapter 14, but we are not going through the chapters as such as more as we are going to focus on what they tell us about Samson and Delilah. Now, the first thing is that the name Samson really means son, S-U-N. And sometimes you may say it may mean son's man or distinguished, but that is what it means. Delilah is a little bit more tricky. Usually, her name means temptress, but you may also see meanings like small or dainty written as well. But for a national hero chosen by God, Samson, when we see Samson, Samson was quite unrighteous and quite earthy. He was the last of the heroes in the book of Judges. He was one of the last judges. Well, not one of, he was the last judge. He was the 12th and last judge. He was a man that had incredible physical strength, but he had also incredible weakness for immoral women. He also had a temper that so much so that he killed 30 innocent bystanders, all because his wife told the riddle, the answer to the riddle, and the guys got it, and he decided, well, I'm going to go down the street there and kill 30 bystanders, and you want, I promise you some clothes, now you can have theirs, you know, that kind of thing. If you think you can get brand new clothes from me, now you're going to get these people old rags, you know, because you didn't win fairly. He obviously, we know he's a very vengeful person. He likes revenge. So, you know, again, we find that he decides after I was going to say something else. After giving away his, when he found out that his wife had been given to his best man, he decides, okay, is that what you're going to do? Well, I'm going to go and get 300 foxes, light their tails, and send them through your crops and burn the bloody crops down. And that is what he does. You know, these are the kinds of people that the kind of person that Samson is. But Samson is one of these guys who is linked to prominent biblical figures like Isaac and Joseph and Samuel and John the Baptist, in that he was born to a woman who was previously considered infertile and was not supposed to have any children. And so, and all these other men that were born there, they were not supposed to be born. Their mothers were also infertile, but God made them fertile. And Manoah wanted to be a father, but he and his wife could not conceive until the Lord solved their infertility problem, and it was solved. And you realize the mother's name is not mentioned in the Bible. Only his father's name is Manoah. He's from the tribe of Dan. He and his wife lived in Zorah, which is about 15 miles west of Jerusalem, and which is on the border of Philistia. And then one day, an angel appears to this childless woman to say that she would have a son. But there's one particular important aspect to this son that she's going to have. The son is going to be a Nazarite from birth, and he is supposed to begin the delivery of Israel from the hand of the Philistines. Now, Samson wasn't supposed to deliver them completely. We will know that David did that eventually when he slew Goliath. who was the giant of the Philistines. And so David was able to put an end to the reign of the Philistines. However, Samson was supposed to start that process, which he did. And Israel and Philistia were neighbors, but the Philistines were the dominant superpower of the region, and their presence was corrupting the influence on Israel's culture. So because the Philistines would have been considered Gentile, probably Greek, they're somewhere around what is called Crete. Because the Israelites, because if you read verses 1 of chapter 13, you will see again the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, so the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. So having done that, it is like they're in a kind of an exile kind of situation. Well, not necessarily exile, but they were controlled by the Philistines or the Philistines. So obviously, being a dominant power, they were influencing the culture of Israel, and God did not want that, because it would mean that they will probably start worshiping gods like Dagon and all these other people, gods that the Philistines would have worshipped, and they would have started adopting all the culture of the Philistines. That's what happens, if you're a smaller country and a larger country is dominating the area, the smaller nations become all waft into the larger country, the larger power, and God did not want that, because that would mean that his people would not see him as their God. And so Samson was sent by God for the specific reason of beginning the delivery of Israel from the hand of the Philistines. That is what he was, and you will see in verse 5, it says here, because you will conceive and give birth to a son, no razor may be used on his head, because the boy is to be a Nazarite set apart to God from birth, and he will begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines. So you see it right there mentioned in chapter 13 and verse 5. Now, what did it mean to be a Nazarite? And a Nazarite was a Jew. A Nazarite was a Jew, but even a more strict Jew. They used to take vows, and some of these other things Jews, a normal Jew, did as well. Like they were not supposed to touch dead bodies, corpses, or corpse, I should say. They were not to cut their hair. These were vows that they made. And one of the things, and what is so significant of hair is that hair was also part of your strength. So they were not supposed to cut their hair. They were to refrain from drinking wine. So no alcohol consumption. They could not eat grapes or drink anything that grape juice or anything that had to do with grapes. They were not supposed to use. And all of this was to symbolize their disdain of worldly culture. They were not to eat anything that was considered unclean. In other words, they were to avoid anything that was ritually unclean. You would also find, as I said, that they would have chosen to take the vow to set themselves apart for a special use from God. However, in Samson's case, he did not make a vow. God ordained him from birth that way. He was to be that person, a Nazarite, and he was not supposed to do any of these things. Obviously, you realize that Samson did not follow the script. Because you would see that he broke each of the vows. He ate honey from the carcass of a lion, and then he turns around and he gives some to his parents and doesn't tell them where it came from. So you could just imagine the parents saying to some folks, "Oh, we have never touched a corpse or eaten anything from it or anything," and Samson there looking cheeky and say, "Yeah, you sure? You think so?" You know, if only you knew. So you can see Samson being that cheeky kind of guy doing that sort of stuff. Obviously, he had a feast at his wedding, and there was no feast in those days without wine. I can tell you that. There was always wine at the feast. So obviously they were swinging and he was drinking alcohol, which he should not have been also. And obviously the alcohol came from grapes. So the wine came from grapes, which he was not supposed to eat as well. And then finally you will find that he was tricked into a haircut. He was not supposed to get his hair cut either. Now, and being a Nazarite meant that this was something you were going to be permanently. There wasn't no changing back or changing. This is who you were permanently. So, as I said, Samson broke every rule set down for him as a Nazarite. And the thing about it is that, you know, the first one that he broke is that he when he was old enough, he asked his parents to arrange a marriage with a non-Jewish woman, a Philistine woman from Teneth, 5 miles to the west. And you can almost hear it, you know, his parents saying to him, "Are you trying to tell me there's no women among you, any Jewish women that you can find to get married to?" And all Samson wanted is the Philistine woman. And he persisted, and obviously he won because he got married to her. Now, as I said already, that Samson was a judge, was the last of the judges, and he would reign as the leader of Israel as a judge for 20 years. Let us look at, when we look at chapter 14 and we look at the wedding is filled with revenge and turmoil, and all kinds of things are coming out of it. And one of the things that I want you to remember is that we have to take into consideration that despite of the kind of person Samson was, we can say that Samson's purpose on earth was to make sure that he began delivering Israel from Philistine rule, from Philistine captivity. And so even in spite of all his warts and limitations and frailties and weaknesses and all of that, he was still doing what God, he was bringing about a conflict between the Israelites and the Philistines, because they weren't living badly. They were living comfortably together, and they were getting too comfortable. That's why God wanted to break up that comfortability and make sure that that doesn't happen. So what we have here is this whole fighting between Samson and the Philistines began after Samson's wedding. And it was a week-long festivities. And the first thing Samson decides to do, "Oh yeah, I'll give you all a riddle. I'm going to have a little friendly wager with you and give you a riddle." And he explained that he will give each of them a set of clothing. And if they fail, they will each give him a set of clothing. And the riddle involved a lion that Samson had killed earlier. You know, it said, well, out of the eater, something to eat; out of the strong, something sweet. So it included the lion that Samson had killed earlier and told no one about. They also and he saw bees that swarm onto the carcass, and he ate the honey from the hive. And so this riddle was, out of the eater came something to eat; out of the strong came something sweet. And so we have this riddle that involves this lion. At first, the men could not solve it. They tried for 3 days, and after 3 days, And now they're going into the midpoint, which is the 4th day of the week. And they're like, we need to do something if we need to win this. And they decided to tell the wife quotes the wife, that you need to find out from your husband how, what is the answer to this riddle. And so Samson goes off and his wife goes and starts to badger him as to, what is the riddle, what is the answer to the riddle. And you can see here that Samson is a bit cautious. He doesn't tell her up front what it is, which states that, he probably suspected that she may have gone and told them, but then he finally tells her the truth on the 7th day, the last day for the riddle to be answered. And sometimes I wonder, well, why can't you just wait till the 8th day? You could have waited till the 8th day, but but from the 4th to the 7th day, she kept badgering him, and he eventually gave in. But in good old Samson's style, he was furious when his wife betrayed him. He storms off to this Philistine city 25 miles away on the Mediterranean coast, and Ashkelon, and there he killed 30 men. He stripped them, took their clothes back to the wedding guests, and say, "Here, this is your prize for solving the riddle." And also too, instead of living with his wife, he went back to his father's house, to his parents' house. And by the time he calmed down enough to return to his wife, "Hi, fella, she gone with a friend." I mean, you were nowhere around. She's gone. So again, and then what you're going to see coming out from there is in chapter 15 is more of, you did this to me, I can do this to you. You did this to me, I'm going to do this to you. So it's revenge for revenge, an eye for an eye, so all the eyes gouching out, everything you could think of. So you see here that once the wife has passed on to someone else, Samson immediately take revenge on the people, and he goes and he lights the tails of these foxes and burn down their crops. And the Philistines decide, "Oh yeah, that's what you're going to do. Well, we're going to burn up your former wife and her father." And that's what they do. And then he retaliates, and he kills more Philistines, and then he retreats into a cave away from the Philistine border. And then when they found out he did this, they go back after him. The soldiers came after him, and instead of allowing his fellow Israelites to suffer for his actions, he agreed to let himself be bound up, provided that the Israelites, his people, did not kill him. Now, you need to note that Samson, when he was doing all of this, it wasn't against his own people. He never did anything against his people. It was always revenge against the Philistines. It was never against the Hebrew people. And so he did not want his fellow Israelites to suffer for his actions. And so he said, once you tie me up and you can tie me up and turn me over to the Philistines, but don't kill me. And then when they did turn him over, try to turn him into the Philistines' hands, he broke the ropes, and he took a jawbone from an ass, from a donkey, and he kills 1,000 of these Philistine soldiers. And so he gets another revenge at them again. But then we realize in the story that sometime later he goes into another Philistine town called Gaza, the same Gaza that we hear about in the news today. And that was near the coast. It was on the southwest coast of Israel. And he visited a prostitute. Now, I want you to know, any of you here who think that Delilah was a prostitute, she was not a prostitute. She was not a harlot. He went and he visited this prostitute. People found out that he was there. They surrounded the house. They tried to capture him at dawn, but by dawn, Samson take up the whole city gate, horse and all, and walk out with it because he was so strong. Uh, and took it up on the mountain by Mount Hebron, and probably God knows what he did with it, tossed it one side or what have you. But they did not get him then either. And I say that because I know someone in the class this morning was talking about him being a prostitute, and I had to say, I mean, Delilah being a prostitute, and I read this to them, and I'm gonna read this to you as well, which is where is it? Verse. Good. Let's look at chapter 16 from verse 1 and following. It reads. One day, Samson went to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute. He went in to spend the night with her. The people of Gaza were told, Samson is here. So they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the city gate. They made no move during the night, saying, at dawn we'll kill him. But Samson lay there only until the middle of the night. Then he got up and took hold of the doors of the city gate, together with the two posts, and tore them loose, bar and all. He lifted them to his shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. And then in verse 4, some time later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. So I just wanted to point out to you that I know many people think that Delilah was a prostitute. It appears that Delilah was not the prostitute mentioned here. And this is how then we are introduced into Delilah. Delilah is from the valley of Sorek. She lives in northern Philistine, in northern Philistia, I should say. And it is presumed that she is a Philistine, or that she's usually thought as a Philistine. We are not told that she's that she's really a Philistine. That is not her identity in the Bible. The reason that she's perceived to be a Philistine is because Samson was attracted to to the Philistine women. She had dealings with the Philistine rulers, and it was quite improbable that the Philistines would have asked an Israelite woman to go in for help, to go and betray one of her own. And so it doesn't seem that she would have been a Hebrew woman. And also too, the fact that she betrayed the Israelite who was a hero to his enemies will also probably we could have probably presumed that that was the case. One thing though I will say is none of these are inconclusive, or none of these are conclusive, but because the name Delilah is actually a Hebrew name. It's not a Philistine name, it's a Hebrew name. But at the same time, there are, and I was to check out some of the names and I forgot, but in the same time, there are a number of people, I shouldn't say many, but there are a number of people in the Bible who had Hebrew names who were not Hebrew people. And so you have to take that into consideration as well.
What did you say Delilah means? I'm sorry, Father. Did you say what the name Delilah means?
Temptress.
Doesn't have a meaning, the word,
temptress.
The name Delilah.
Temptress.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Hello.
Oh,
He said
frozen.
temptress.
Oh, she's frozen. I think she is. Is it me or her?
She.
It's her.
Everybody else can hear me?
We
Yep.
can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Now I can hear you.
Oh,
I
now you
couldn't
can hear me. Yes. You froze just now, Dorothy.
I keep freezing. It must be the internet. I don't know. I
Yes,
keep freezing.
But no, the name
I just-
Delilah means temptress.
That's right.
And
So that's where it comes from.
Yes,
thought that she was a
temptress,
prostitute.
temptress.
Okay.
Yes,
That's what
temptress.
my mind was saying.
It doesn't mean prostitute. It means temptress.
No,
And
well.
yeah.
Okay.
and in some cases, it could also mean dainty or small.
Oh, you said that right.
Yes.
That's
Can I ask a
funny.
question, Father?
Yes, Bryce.
Why was Samson such a troublemaker? I mean, why would he do all these bad things and get himself in trouble and go to the Philistines and not listen to his parents anyway? Is there a reason why?
The reason for that, I believe, is because and this is, I mean, I'm trying to find what's the best language, the best way to put this, and that is to say that this was all part of God's plan in terms of getting the Israelites and the Philistines at loggerheads with each other.
Oh, really?
Because they were cohabiting too well.
Oh, really?
And God, yes, and God did not want the Philistine culture infiltrating into the Israelites' culture, because what it will mean is that you will have, for lack of a better word, a heathenistic culture. And so God wanted to break the bond between these two countries, these two nations. I can hear you, Dorothy. God wanted to break the bond between these two countries, and so Samson's purpose was to do that. And that is why you see that although he did all these things that were against what he was supposed to be doing, and I want you to realize, if you remember carefully, you will see, I don't remember if you remember I saying last week that in the Old Testament, the Spirit of the Lord was never on every person. It was only given to certain people for certain tasks. So it was given to kings and prophets and priests and judges. And Samson was a judge, but it was also given to him too. If you look at verse 6 of chapter 14, you read in verse 6 of chapter 14, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power, so that he tore the lion apart with his bare hands, as he might have torn a young goat. And it's just showing you, and when you talk about the Spirit of the Lord, it is God was using him. It was with such unique power. God's Spirit was allowing him to overcome the Philistines. So that is all part of it, Bryce.
Can I say, I wonder if this is justifying what God wants. I mean, did this all have to happen in order to do something to get at the Philistines?
Correct.
Destroy them?
Correct.
Right. It is all, that's why when I said it was all part of God's plan to make that separation between the Israelites and the Philistines, because the Israelites were beginning to buy in to the Philistines' culture, and the next thing they will be worshiping Dagon instead of God, and that sort of stuff. So yes, it was all a part of God's plan. Correct.
Oh boy.
Okay, let's continue. Where am I? The other part of it is when you look at in chapter 16, is that you see, well, first thing we have to establish that there's no mention of Delilah and Samson being married. They were lovers, but they were not married. But one thing we recognize about Delilah is that Delilah marked the beginning of Samson's downfall and demise. And it was, you hear about fatal attraction. It was almost like fatal attraction, because
you mean like that movie Fatal Attraction, Michael Douglas and Glenn Close?
Yep. Because
yeah, like where Glenn Close gets killed in the end.
Because
Rabbit dies.
yes, but because the Philistine leaders were able to bribe Delilah and paying her large sums of money to get the secret out of Samson's supernatural strength and to betray him.
So it was sort of like that movie Fatal Attraction with Michael Douglas and Glenn Close.
Yes.
I'm surprised he didn't learn from his first wife. I mean,
yes, you would have thought he would have learned. You would have thought he would have learned. But and I said to the class this morning, wait, George is the only other man. Oh no, you got Deacon and you got DJ, but men are normally weak when it comes around women, especially when they are madly in love with them. That is not to say that sometimes you don't have to put your foot down, but
Mm.
it started from Adam and Eve. That's where it started from. Eve.
Well, men are usually weak.
Eve giving the fruit, giving Adam the fruit to eat of, although God had told him not to do it. But instead of listening to God, he listened to the woman who he loved. And this is and we see this all down through the years, even up to now. It still happens.
So you're saying men are weak?
I think they are in certain, when it comes to women. I think they are. They might be strong in other things, but I think they are, particularly when it comes to women
I hope
who
you're
they
not going to say that
love,
to your wife ever.
who they think they are. I think men can be very weak. As
But
I
I
said,
think-
that,
don't say that to your wife ever.
as I said, that doesn't mean you don't put your foot down sometimes. But there is a pattern, and especially and I mean, think about it. All due respects to women here. So all due respects, don't shoot me, please.
Oh, no.
Oh, no, we're not gonna shoot
look
you,
at
please.
look at the first wife of Samson. Look at the wife of Samson. Look at Delilah. What do? They nag him and nag him and nag him and nag him.
Oh,
Oh
come
my
on.
God.
And
That's a
listen,
stretch.
listen.
That's a stretch.
Listen. Look at chapter 16 and verse 15.
Use the term, right?
Let's start from verse 15. Then she said to him, how can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? This is the third time you have made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength. With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was
Oh my
tired to
God.
death.
Father, this is a paternalistic society that you're talking
It's
about.
clearly
This is
written
what-
by
Justified,
men.
but
Yeah.
What did you say,
Listen,
Deacon?
Deacon Allen is correct. So yeah, I mean,
What you said, Deacon?
it's a paternalist society. Go ahead, Deacon.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes, it is a
Latino
paternalist
society.
society. It is
Yeah,
a
Deacon
paternalist
just said
society.
that you were returning to
But
society.
the
Deacon
thing
Allen
is,
just said.
when you think about it, sometimes this can happen, and therefore, the
Oh.
poor guy was so tired to death of the nagging.
Lost
He
you
says, "Okay,
again.
listen, I can tell you.
You can start the salmon if you want, huh?
I can tell you." And
Marty?
so he
Do
told.
you want to start the salmon?
You would have thought he would have learned from his first mistake with the wife, but again, he loved Delilah. What it
So he
shows
didn't learn
us,
his lesson,
what
you're telling
it
me.
shows us is that these women love their people, or they love money more than they love him. Obviously,
David made a lot of mistakes.
Obviously, he loved them more than they love him. All right, let's continue. Where are we? So you find is that it wasn't that he bold-facedly told them right off, but I don't understand why he didn't realize that he told them a lie. She called in the Philistines, and that wasn't enough. I mean, 3 or more times she did that, and you would have known that the woman cannot be trusted. But
Of course not.
there you have it. But then he finally tells her what the secret is, and the secret is my hair. If you cut off my hair, I will lose my strength. And so said, so it was. I think that verse 20 in chapter 16 is one of the most painful verses, is one of the most painful verses in the Bible, because you read it, then she called Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He awoke from his sleep and thought, I'll go out as before and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. And that is where the whole Spirit of the Lord left him. So here is it now. I told you not to drink wine, you drink. I told you not to.
He
go
told you
around
not to
get-
drink water.
All right,
beer,
hold
but he
on,
didn't
hold on,
listen.
hold on, Bryce. I told you not to have anything to do with carcasses of dead corpses. You went and you did that. I told you not to what's the other thing? Well, obviously, anything to do with
Unclean.
grapes or anything like that. You did that. And now the last thing you had that I told you you were needed to keep, you decide to throw that away as well, which is your hair is not to be cut. So obviously you will have done all the things that you're supposed not to do, and you're left with nothing. And so the Lord departed.
So
from
that
him.
was God's punishment?
Well, it would have been, yes, it would have been.
Yeah.
Because he disobeyed God. I'm smiling because one of the members this morning, I was talking to them this afternoon after I got home, and she said to me after she went home, and she said to her husband, listen, you better be nice, because if you're not, well, we better be nice, because if you're not, God can have his revenge on us in some way.
Yeah.
So
It
you know,
seems to me that Samson is quite a contrast to almost all the other prophets.
He wasn't a prophet though, but he was not a prophet.
No, he was the leader.
Yeah, he was a leader. He was a leader. He was not a prophet. But you are right in the sense that he was different. He was different because of the way he lived his life. But the thing about it is about him is that he was still a man of great faith. He had faith in God. And that too is what helped him. As you will see in the end, he had faith in, even although he was selfish in wanting to bring the building down on all of them because they gout showed his eyes and he was blind, he still had the faith to believe that God will help him to do it. He had that faith.
I don't think he had faith. But...
You don't think he had faith?
No.
You don't think Samson? You don't think Samson had faith?
I know God might have manipulated this, or had this done so that they could get to the Philistines, but I don't see him as a very spiritual person.
No. Well, I'm not saying that he's a spiritual person, but at the same time, when you read verse 28, his last prayer to God, don't you see that as a man with faith, that he saw that he needed God, he depended on God, that he needed God's dependence?
Yeah, I'd say he was having faith.
You don't see that, Deacon?
Yeah, you don't see that, Deacon?
No, hold on, Bryce. I'm talking to Deacon. Yeah.
It's hard for me to see him as a man following in God designated him to be a Nazirite and to live a life maybe like Samuel, but he went in a very different direction than Samuel did.
Well, yeah, but you see, but the thing is about it is, try not to compare him with somebody else. Take him on his own merit. Wait, hold on a minute, Susan. Yeah, I'll let you. Take him on his own. Don't compare him to somebody else. Think about the purpose for which he came. And I mean, you use the word manipulate, and that's a word we will use, but God wanted division between the Israelites and the Philistines. Could he have gone about it doing it another way? He probably could have. But at the same time, my feeling is that God only moved away from him after he had given up all that God told him not to, if you understand what I'm saying. Even although he did all the other things, God was still with him. If you get what I am saying here. So that is why, yes, he's not a spiritual man like some others, as you may think, but at the same time, in spite, what it does tell us is that even in spite of our ways, in spite of our weaknesses, in spite of what we may do, and the wrongs we may do, that God can still use us. That is what it says about Samson. Yes, Susan.
Oh, I just had wondered how he could lead people in spiritualism when he was marching to his own drummer. He wasn't.
Correct. He was.
That-
And I'm not saying he was a spiritual man. I'm not saying that I'm not saying he's a spiritual man.
Okay.
Although again,
God gave him chances.
yeah, God gave him, that's true. It also tells you that God is a God of chances, because God gave him a lot of chances.
20 years of chance. He married an enemy with a Philistine. He was marrying one of the enemy, and then he was
but that was all but that was all God, but that was all part of God's plan for what God. You see, I always say to people, I always say to folks, out of every bad thing, good comes out of it.
Oh.
Out of
So
every bad thing, I believe there is good that comes out of it, no matter how bad it is. And so you have here a situation that even in a situation out of the bad that he has done, or the wrong that he has done, because being vengeful is not a good thing, but out of the bad that he has done, good still came out of it.
So you're saying good still came out of it?
Well, he killed a bunch
of course, good still come out of it, in terms of that he started the process of what God wanted, and that is not to turn the Israelites into a hedonistic kind of people.
Okay.
So that's the good that comes out of it. That is the plan that God, or the purpose that God had for him, and he accomplished it. He accomplished it. In spite of all the wrong things, the bad things, the horrible things, the revengeful things that he did, he still accomplished what God wanted him to accomplish. And that's my feeling about it.
He used Samson's temper to further God's plan.
And you see, and the thing is that we miss as well, as I said even earlier, he was never bad towards his people. It was only towards the Philistines. Even when the Philistines were coming for his people, he said, no, I don't want you to take the blame. I don't want you to be punished for what I did. Bind me up, just don't kill me, and deliver me into their hands. And I will, and more or less, I will take it from there, is what he was saying. And so you will find is that when it came to his own people, he was not that way toward them. He was only that way toward the Philistines. Yes, Dorothy.
Am I muted? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah,
Dorothy.
we can hear you.
So back to the hair. Who cut his hair? He cut his own hair?
No.
How did he lose his strength? His hair
Delilah
got
got someone to come in
whom?
and cut his hair while he was sleeping on her. Let's look at it. Here, verse where it was. Hold on. Let's look at chapter 16 and verse 17. Let's read from there.
Right,
So he, meaning Samson, told Delilah everything. No razor has ever, this is chapter 16, verse 17.
Yes.
No razor has ever been used on my head, he said, because I have been a Nazarite set apart to God since birth. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I will become as weak as any other man. When Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines, come back once more. He has told me everything. So the rulers of the Philistines returned with the silver in their hands, and having put him to sleep on her lap, she called a man to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. Yes, and there it is. So then she called, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And he woke up and thought that he would be able to defeat them, and realized that the Spirit of the Lord was not with him anymore. Yeah, yes.
He did not know his hair had the strength.
Yes, Susan. And then I think Juanita want to say something. Yes, Susan.
Well, do you think other religions not cutting their hair has anything to do with
I
this?
think so. I mean, I am not sure, but I would not be surprised. I would not surprise me if they do. Yes, I believe there is some connection.
Okay, thank
I
you.
believe there's some
Gosh,
connection.
you're frozen again. I'm gonna have to.
Yes, Juanita, you wanted to say something?
Yes.
Nope.
Mhm.
I
And then
have
and
a-
then Rhonda. Mhm.
I have a little problem with putting some things together.
Mhm.
Now,
Go ahead.
from a child,
Mhm.
well, at Sunday school, you hear the story of Samson and Delilah.
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
In my childish mind, I figure would say it, but I can't understand him.
Mhm.
If the woman is tricking him all the time, he should
Mhm.
realize by now, he should realize after a while that what she's doing, and therefore, don't tell him where his strength lay,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. Mhm.
But when you said just so, when you said just now that was
Mhm.
part of God's plan, I
Mhm.
said, okay, that answers my question. I can never figure out why he was so foolish as a man.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
but you told me,
Mhm.
you just said
Mhm.
it was part of God's plan. So
Mhm.
I accepted that. I said, okay, as we in Barbados would say, he can help himself. It's part of God's
Mhm.
plan.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
but no, the part that troubles me then is if it was part of God's plan,
Mhm.
why did the Lord then say, why did the Lord take his spirit from him?
Mhm.
Because of his action,
Ah,
because of his actions, although it was part of God's plan. But I guess my human mind would never be able to fathom that.
Well,
But
oh, go ahead.
but
Mhm.
but then when we got down to when he pulled down the pillars
Temple.
and destroyed
Mhm.
everybody, right? When somebody was saying that he couldn't be spiritual if he did that,
Mhm.
I was wondering if it not so much whether he was spiritual or not, but that he understood what the Nazarite vow meant. I guess from his so despite how reckless his life was,
Mhm.
way back from whatever his training was from a child, whether how he grew up with it, he understood what it means to be a Nazarite, and he understood that. I still think he understood that God would have had to be with him as a Nazarite at even at that point, even despite the fact of how foolish he behaved,
Mhm.
despite the
Right.
fact of how he got himself into this situation, he
Mhm.
still understood that God got a hand in my life in some way, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
But this thing I still cannot figure out is why, if you planned all this, why did you take the spirit away from him?
And the reason why,
When he
and
was not responsible for his actions.
yeah, yeah, but the thing is about it is, and this is my belief, and this is my belief, the fact remains still is that um uh he had taken he had given up all the other stuff that meant to be as a Nazarite, you know, the alcohol and all of that good stuff. But the one final thing that he had that would have allowed him to still and I'll come back to something that you said, which I think was very profound, but the fact that he came back and that he lost the very last thing that was meant to be who he was or who he was supposed to be. It was an act of a total, then it became an act of total disobedience to God. Um, he disobeyed God periodically in terms of who he was to be as a Nazarite. Yes, God gave him chances after chances after chances after chances. But the very last thing um, that he was not supposed to have happen, he had happened. And therefore, God then God would have seen that, in my opinion, God would have seen that as an act of total disobedience, and withdrew himself from him, leaving him on his own. And God can do that. I always say to folks, if God does not, if God has a purpose in your life and you're not fulfilling that purpose, he's going to turn to somebody else to fulfill it. He's not going, he will eventually turn to somebody else to fulfill that purpose. And therefore, and the thing is about it is, you also have to realize too is that God did not leave him totally. God never leave anybody totally, no matter how bad a person or evil a person that person is. What God did when it says that the Spirit of the Lord left him, what that meant was that God, the task that God had given him to do no longer needed God to do it.
Care of it.
You get what I'm
Yeah.
saying, Bonita?
And he took care of it.
Yeah, he
Right.
took care of it.
That it no
So
longer needed God to do it.
that
was done.
God no longer needed him.
Oh,
God no
oh,
longer
That God
needed
no
him.
longer needed him. Not that he no longer needed God. You said
Oh.
something there that is very profound, that you believe that he realized that he believed that God was always with him. And honestly, God was always with him. And that he also realized at the very end that his life, he realized, if he didn't realize it before when he was alive, well, when he was doing all these things, he realized it at that point, that he needed God, that he needed to depend on God to do his final act, even as self-centered as that act was, because it was a self-centered act. It was a selfish act. He was only doing it because of his eyesight, because of his blindness. But at the same time, and this is where I said he had deep faith, because after doing what you're doing, after now seeking revenge again, to think that God will bring you through this, you will have to got real faith to believe that, because you will have to really have real faith in God to believe that God will do this for you. As self-centered or selfish as it is to believe that, and obviously he realized his dependence on God. He realized that in the end, even if he didn't realize it before, he realized that in the end.
So you think
God died.
he's
Wait, hold on a minute,
Deacon,
Deacon, hold on 1 second, hold that thought. Were you finished, Juanita? Oh, she's gone back to mute. I know Rhonda wanted to say something. Rhonda, you want to say something before Deacon, or let Deacon say what he was saying?
No, I don't have anything profound to say.
Okay.
I just am finding this whole thing. There's so many things
Mhm.
within this that have
Mhm.
come up for me.
Mhm.
So many interesting things.
Mhm.
And I'll just even the whole concept of a Nazirite.
Mhm.
The whole concept is just amazing.
Oh.
So
Mhm.
I don't know. I'll just go ahead and let Deacon talk because I'm
Go
not
ahead.
even sure what I can say.
Okay. Go ahead, Deacon. What were you saying just now?
I see him. It's hard for me to connect with you and how you see him as a godly man.
I didn't say I saw him as a godly man. Don't put words I did
Well,
not say.
this is God's plan, that God is acting somehow through him. And there's so many other heroes have had many negative behaviors and have even been vengeful. And David, was took a woman and put her husband up to be killed. I just find it very hard to see Samson as a man that's performing what God wants us to do, or
Where is
so
it?
vengeful.
Wait, hold on 1 second. Where is it? Because it was mentioned in one of the verses that we read. I am going to, anyone remember where that verse is?
What?
It was
That he was a
mentioned.
godly man?
It was mentioned in one of the chapters that we just read that this was more or less all part of God's plan. Where was it? Hold 1 second. I'm going to see.
It was the beginning of chapter 14 when he took his first wife as a Philistine.
Chapter 14. Tell me the verse, George, please. Thank you. Let me see.
I believe it's verse 4.
This was from the Lord.
Oh, yes. It says, but Samson said to his father, get her for me. She's the right one for me. His parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines, for at that time they were ruling over Israel. So that is the first indication that we have of, and it might not be the first. Let me see, hold 1 second. It may not be the first either. Let's look at what the angel said to the parents, which is normally where you see, I mean, the angel said that this boy is set apart to God from birth. As I said, Nazarites were supposed to be making vows. Samson didn't even have to make a vow. You read in verse 5, because you will conceive and give birth to a son, no razor may be used on his head, because the boy is to be a Nazarite set apart to God from birth. And he will begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines. That was what he was ordained to do. And therefore, in order to do that, in my opinion, in order to do that, you had to have the guidance of God. The same way that the Spirit of the Lord came on him in verse 6, which was only given to people in the Old Testament to do things on behalf of God. We cannot, I can't say how we could say that God was not leading him. And I'm not saying that God was leading him to do the bad things, but that he was still being led by God. And that is what I believe.
All right.
Not that God, it wasn't that God was leading him to do bad things, the bad things that he did, but God was leading him to bring about what he wanted. Go ahead, Susan. And then Lisa.
Okay, I think that was very profound when it came from the Lord, because maybe he married the Philistine lady knowing that there would be conflict farther down and he would be forced to, go to battle and kill the Philistines and get, make it happen. So
yeah, it is something that, I mean, I know it is something that we all struggle with in terms of why would the Lord use such a person? And that's why I said I always like to say to folks, nobody's beyond redemption either. And sometimes we think, well, this person is too bad for God to use them. That is not true. And I always point people to Paul. Look at Saul, how bad he was. He was going about getting Christians killed and persecuted, and yet God used him and made him out to be the primary person in the New Testament after Jesus. The primary person. And this is a man who, when he was on the road to Damascus, was about to go and capture Christians, to bring them back to Jerusalem, to do what he wanted to do with them. And so, and that's why I say, you do not know, we do not know why God does these things or allow these things to happen.
he was using Samson's temper again.
But he has his plan. He has his plan. The same way I will say to you, why would God allow thousands of people to die in the World Trade Center, or to be gunned down in a school, or to be whatever? We wonder why. But at the same time, something good does come out of it. Yes, Lisa.
It's almost like just in spite of Samson's flaws, it's like, yes, and I think this is what people have been saying and what we're sort of getting at, that God still needed him. Like, this is what you're here for, and he's not going to accomplish it 100%, but he took a step so that other steps.
Yeah, you see, as I said, I'm not saying that Samson was a godly man or that he was a spiritual man. I mean, although I can't even tell you if he was or not, because
it doesn't say whether
it doesn't say if he was or not. As I said, his vendetta was only against the Philistines. It wasn't even against his own people. So the fact even tells the story that if he was such a bad person, why wasn't he bad towards his own people? I mean, you turn off your badness toward your people, but you're bad towards another people if you're totally bad. And this is where you have to delve into it and to realize that the way he was towards what he would probably classify the enemy. That was who he was. That is who he did not do this against his own people. So obviously there is something more to it than just thinking, oh, well, he was a bad person. For all we know, he could have been going to the temple every Sabbath. He could have been doing all those things. It doesn't tell you this. He could have been doing all these things, going to the synagogue, doing all the Jewish things that he's supposed to be doing. As well. But
we also know that he was doing things that
it mentions it mentions these things as they pertain to the Philistines, in order, in my opinion, in order to fulfill what God had planned. And you see it from the very beginning, where even the wife he chose was all part of that plan. Yes, George. Wait a minute, hold on, George. Bryce, were you going to say something? Because I know George Bryce.
Yeah, I was going to say something. Yeah, I mean, it's like, I mean, you don't know. I mean, Samson could have been celebrating Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur or even Passover.
It is possible. We don't know that. It is possible. We do not know that. Yes, George. Thank you, Bryce. Go ahead, George.
I think it's very hard for us to realize that what things were like back then, and some of this stuff wasn't that unusual. I mean, men basically had more than one wife all the time. You know, the 12 tribes of Israel were born to 4 separate women, and only 2 of them were his wife. You know,
well, that's not quite true. The 12 tribes of Israel were born to 2 women.
Nope, 4. George is right.
No, they were born to the mothers and their handmaidens.
That's right. That's right. Dan, for example, son of one of
how many children did Leah have?
I don't know the numbers.
I thought Leah had 10 children and Rachel
like
had
7.
2. Okay, you may be right. I can't remember. I'll check that. Go ahead, but continue.
Fact check.
I mean, the Old Testament times, when we look back with what we know now, and we look at that time, we say, oh, they were barbarians. But, you know, God told them back then, I mean, it was an eye for an eye until Jesus got here. Then we got turned the other cheek. So, you know, we can't judge these folks based on today's morals and values.
No, we can't.
You know, they lived in a very different time. And, you know, as Father said, we pick up things from their lives. This guy was, you know, 20 years he was a judge, and all we know about are these couple chapters. He could have been a choir boy other than these things.
That's what I'm saying.
We just don't know.
Yes, and you're correct. He could be. We don't know. All we know is what God's plan was in terms of separating Israel from the Philistines. That's all we know, and that is what these 4 chapters zero in on. And the only inkling, as I said, it gives you an inkling of who he was towards his people by the fact that he did not want them to suffer for him. He was willing to allow himself to be the person. Pam, yes, I remember it was seven. I think Leah had 6 sons and a daughter or something. It was 7 children that Leah had, I think. So you're right, George. But the thing is, the thing about it is that the inkling that gives us the impression that he was not bad toward his own people was that there's nothing mentioned of him being bad towards his own people. That's one. And the second thing is that when he had the opportunity to be bad towards his own people, he did not do it. He said to them, tie me up, just don't kill me. And therefore, it tells you that when it came to his people, he might have been a goody two shoes kind of guy. When it came to the Philistines, that's where he was rotten, for lack of a better word. So you are right. Yes, and George, you are right. I don't remember. I don't know why I thought that Leah had 10, but Leah had 7. That's what she had, 7. And Rachel had 2, and then the other 3 came from maidens. Go ahead. Yes.
Well, I had a comment on I think at the end Samson realized that he was not doing God's will the way he wanted him to, like he was disobeying laws and things like that. So his last gesture of showing God how much it meant to him, that, he died saying, take me, and I will, finish off some others. But did the split happen, Israel and Philistine, after that, or do we know? I mean, was it successful?
As I said, if Samson was successful?
No, as the split between Israel.
Oh yes, the split came in the time of David and Goliath.
Okay.
The split came in the time of David and Goliath. After with David killing Goliath is when then the Israelites were free from the Philistines. Yes.
After this.
But it was after this. Samson started it. David finished it. Correct.
That's what I need.
That is what happened. Samson started it, but David finished it. Yes.
Okay.
All right.
I am sorry, Deacon, and it's good, and it's all right to disagree with me, and I like the back and forth. It is just that I see Samson in different way that you may. I do not see him as a godly. I did not see him as in these chapters, I don't see him as a godly person, but I still believe that God was using him for his purpose. And that is what God was doing, using him for his purpose. My biggest gripe with Samson is how revengeful he is. That is my biggest gripe about him, especially at the end. Even although God had left him, he could not even say, well, God, let me finish the work that you asked me to do. He was finishing the work because his eyes were plucked out. And that is my sorest point with Samson. But I do believe the fact that, even from the choice of his first wife, his parents did not know that this was from the Lord. And that sets the tone. It sets the tone for everything that follows. Yes, Rhonda.
There's so many things that are coming into my mind, but I guess one thing I want to ask about is this: is Nazarite the word connected to Nazareth at all?
Yes.
Yeah, it would be. It would be. But
well, I was just looking back.
Although let me ask. Let me rephrase that. I didn't check that, but if Nazarite, because it could be Nazarite, but there was also the word Nazarene. So you also have to put that into context, because when Jesus was to be born, they didn't call him a Nazarite, they called him a Nazarene. So I am not quite sure. Being a Nazarite was part of a more, had to do with becoming, even as somebody will put it, a more Jewish Jew. You were even a more. Wait, hold on one second. Hold one second, Rhonda. You wanted to say something about that, Pam?
Yeah, according to Wikipedia, you should not confuse Nazarite with Nazarene.
That's what I thought.
Yep, just like you said. And Nazarite comes from the Hebrew word nazir, meaning consecrated or separated.
Correct, set apart.
It may ultimately be derived from a root meaning to vow, which is similar to the nadar.
Correct, to set apart. Yes, yep. Because that's why after I said that, no, it has nothing to do, it's not to be confused with Nazarene. It's not the same. The Nazarene, and you'll find that you've had churches about, I don't know if there's any here in the States, but I know in Barbados you have Church of the Nazarene, though that comes from the word Nazareth. That would come from Nazareth. Well, yes, go ahead, Rhonda.
The thing that was interesting as I was kind of scanning about what Nazarites was, that a Jew could be a Nazarite maybe for a certain period of time.
No, you couldn't be.
No, you couldn't be
there. Once you made the vow to be a Nazarite, it was a permanent vow you made. Okay. Once you made the vow to be a Nazarite, you were making a permanent vow.
Well, because when I was reading that, it said you could do it for, like, you could be abstained from alcohol. And there were only 3 Nazarites in the Bible: John the Baptist and somebody else, John and Samson, that were identified.
Okay, were identified, right. But that doesn't mean that they were the only ones.
Yeah, and then the next thing that kind of came up from that is, of course, many Christian denominations do not think you should drink, for example.
Correct. That is
true. And I kind of wondered about, did that kind of stem from their reading that part and
that is quite possible.
Their perception. And then the other thing that kind of struck me in this was, relationships are very powerful in our lives. And I'm talking about wives and girlfriends and boyfriends, those very powerful, significant others. And, when we look back at the pattern of how we sometimes will put those relationships ahead of our relationship to God, and how much power those relationships have over us in our lives. This struck me a little bit along that direction, because Delilah was somebody obviously he was infatuated with. And even though, like Susan talked about, and even though, like Juanita talked about, these women had obviously been proven as a little bit untrustworthy, he still ultimately kind of gave in and said, yes, this is the secret to my strength. And then when that happened, he put that relationship above his relationship with God. And she cut his hair, and that's all she wrote. So, that was when the consequence of that was he lost his vision. So it just made me think about,
and he lost his strength.
And his strength. So it just made me think about the relationships, and it also made me think about the culture, the culture differences with Christians, how some Christians believe certain things about what you need to do in order to be close to God, and including not drink, and how other denominations, like Jesus wasn't a Nazarite. I wouldn't think of him that way, right?
No, he wasn't.
He drank wine.
No, he wasn't.
He drank wine, so he could have been a Nazarite. He was changing water into wine and making it the best as that. So
but but then I think what you're saying is that ultimately, if God's got this idea or thought that this person is going to be his instrument to achieve his goal, it's almost irrelevant how that person acts.
I'm not saying necessarily that. But the thing about it is that sometimes we may have to act in ways that would probably not be what we will call suitable in order for something to be achieved. But that does not mean that is irrelevant as to how any person act. I'm not saying that, because again, I am saying to you that you don't see how he acts toward his own, except for the fact of the whole tying up that he said not to, that you could tie him up but don't kill him, and handed him over. So I'm not saying that what you're saying. I would prefer to put it in a way to say, sometimes there are things you may have to do that may not be what one will think was the right thing to do, but it was able to accomplish what needs to be accomplished. And sometimes all things to be accomplished cannot be accomplished by being, for lack of a better word, good. Sometimes some things have to be accomplished by other means. Wait, hold on a minute, Juanita. Were you finished, Rhonda?
Yeah, I think the only other piece of
Wait,
this,
I'm coming back to you, Juanita. I'm coming back. Hold on a
the
minute.
only other little piece of this I kind of have been, it's going to cause me to do some more thinking about is the barren women, and how then God intervenes and they produce a child. And I don't think any of us in this group, and maybe the Episcopalians in general, are really literal biblicists. We tend to think of it metaphorically, or we think of it at multiple levels, and we look at the symbols involved. And it kind of, I don't have anything brilliant to say about this other than the fact that the symbolism of a barren mother, and then a symbolism of a child being born to that mother, and then the role, like all of them, John the Baptist, you know what I'm saying.
That's throughout the Bible.
Yeah, that is
it's
throughout
the Bible, right? And then it's just given me a lot to think about. Like, what does that, for us that don't take things necessarily at that literal level, what symbolism does that then help us to understand, or does it point to? I don't really have any answers for any of this. I'm just remarking on it. But those are the things that crossed my mind I didn't realize there was so much to Samson that I really thought I knew, but I don't know.
Yes. And go ahead, Juanita, and then I'll come back to somebody and say something. Go ahead, Juanita.
No, I was going to say that I was just thinking the same thing that, her name again, who just spoke.
Rhonda.
Right. That he says it perfectly for me, because I was just thinking, I never realized there was so much to the story of Samson, right? Because he usually focus on what Delilah did to him. Because now y'all are talking about the Nazarite, and we said that Nazarite means set apart or consecrated for God's work and so on. And it makes me wonder if when God chooses you to do something, if he never really leaves you no matter what. Because yes, we thought that when I say leave, yes, we say the spirit left him. But in truth and in fact, he didn't totally forsake him, because in the chapter 13, when the angel came to his mother, he said that the boy will be a Nazarite of God from birth until the day of his death. Right? And despite his drinking and doing all the things that a Nazarite was not supposed to do, I noticed that in chapter 16, in the very verse, it said that, verse 20, when it says, then she called Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He awoke from his sleep and thought, I'll go as before and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. Yet, and it told you, the Philistines seized him. But I noticed that right there in 22, it says, but the hair on his head it began to grow again after that relationship. And I wonder if the writer was giving us a clue, you know, as that he's going to regain his strength. Because then by the time we get back there, by the time he's in the temple, these people in the Philistines even realized that Isaiah had grown.
Correct.
And I'm wondering, so then it was true then he was in Nazareth to the day he died, because even though all the other things left him, that very thing which was his strength, which was shown in his hair, it came back. So I
yeah,
don't
you
know.
see, the
So
thing
maybe
is, it's it.
Leave us totally.
Yeah, you see, the thing is about it is, you read something just now. I was going to comment on. You read something just now that says that he was going to be a Nazarite. Oh yes, which was verse 7. But he said to me, you will conceive and bring birth to a son. Now then, drink no wine or other fermented drink, and do not eat anything unclean, because the boy will be a Nazarite of God from birth unto the day of his death. So yes, so I mean, here you see, and that's why sometimes you have to look into what the angels would have said as well, because the angels will set the tone as to what that person, the same way how the angel Gabriel went to Mary and set the tone of what that would be, of what kind of person Jesus will be. And you see that there as well. So if we are to go on what the angel said, yes, and remember, he was not a Nazarite by making vows. He was a Nazarite ordained by God to be. So that even put him in a different light to even other Nazarites who made vows to be Nazarites. So that too, you never could tell that, yes, he would most likely have been Nazarite even despite the fact of what he did from birth till death. It's the same way. I mean, we are Christian, but that doesn't mean we don't do wrong. Does that stop us from being Christian? That's the question you have to ask. Do we stop being Christian whenever we do something wrong? And the answer to that is no. We don't. That is where love and forgiveness come into play, and you can be forgiven by a God who's forgiving and merciful, and loving, and be forgiven. But that doesn't mean that you stop being Christian, or you stop being one of God's children. You know.
Can I make one brief comment?
Yes.
I was looking through the notes here, and it says, in relation to being a Nazarite or a holy person, that in all the other judges, you can observe this relationship between them and God, but it's hard to find it in relationship with Samson.
Yeah, and as I said, I think I cannot remember. I have to read the other judges and see what their roles were, but at the same time, Samson had a particular purpose, and his purpose was to begin the delivery of the Israelites out of Egypt, out of Philistine.
He did have a purpose, and that was. Samson did have a purpose.
That was his purpose, to deliver, deliver the people out of Israel, and the Israelites out of from the Philistines, and that was his purpose. Now, we could say, you know, he was an awful person doing what he did and how he did it. We could say that. Some people will say that. But you see, for me, to quite say he did not have a relationship with God when he did fulfill what God wanted. Well, if he didn't have a relationship with God, God certainly had one with him. But there was some relationship going on, because if there wasn't, he could not fulfill what God wanted him to fulfill. That is the point I am making.
I have to go, Father. So I'll see you next week.
Bye-bye, Bryce. Bye-bye.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Rhonda
wants to say something quickly. My gosh, I didn't realize it's almost 8 o'clock. Let's go, Rhonda.
No, I'm good. I'm good. I was waving bye to Bryce.
Oh, I thought you wanted to say
Yeah.
something.
No, I'm
okay.
okay.
Yeah, we gotta go.
All right.
Okay.
Well, this was an interesting session. But the thing about it is that as I said before, I personally believe that that in spite of Samson's mistakes and in spite of the wrongs he did and all this stuff, that God could still use him, and God did use him. And it means that in spite of our mistakes, our frailties, our weaknesses and so forth, God can still use us. And that is something that we have to recognize. One of the other things you could get out of this when it comes to even with Delilah is and the women that he encountered, that you got to be careful who you trust, and you know, you got to place your trust in people who are trustworthy. And I know it is difficult to find out who's trustworthy, and the only way you can help to discern that is by asking God to send people to you, to bring people in your lives who are trustworthy. And
But even that gets
and even that, yes,
yeah,
but even
I
that,
mean, you know,
but,
you
but
can
even but at the same time, you have I still think the aspect of it is, the other part of it is that sometimes we do pray, but we also have to ask ourselves, do we believe that God will do it? And that's the other aspect of it. Do we believe, or do we truly believe that God will do it? And that is the thing. Praying is one thing, having the belief, having the faith is another, and the two of them must go hand in hand. You know, I had an old priest, a canon in Barbados. He died at 101. And he used to say, he would come out, like sometimes we would have staff meetings because I was the associate at the largest church in Barbados at the time, and he was the assistant priest, and there was the rector, and there was another associate. And when we sat down to have staff meetings, he used to tell us the joke of how he would go into the hospital, or people would go into the hospital, and when he's going in, people will be coming out, and he will say to people, "Oh, so how's so and so doing?" And these other pastors and all of that will say to him, "Oh, you know, I just pray for them, but I don't think they can make it." I mean, and he is like, so what's the sense? Because you're praying for some person, you just pray that they'll be healed, but yet still you don't believe they're going to be healed. Or at least the way how you prayed, the healing that you expected, because I mean, death is healing too. But that's not what they meant. They meant that they went in there to pray that that the person will be well and be able to get up and walk out and all this sort of stuff. And they will say, "Well, I prayed for him, but I don't think he can make it." So what's the sense? You know, almost that's what he used to say. When you're praying, his point was, you got to pray and believe. You got to pray and have faith. And therefore, sometimes we pray, but we don't believe it would happen, or we don't have the faith that what we're praying for will come to pass. And that is a problem in a lot of our prayers. That is a problem in a lot of our prayers. So, all right, have a good night. I am exhausted.
Good one.
Have a good night, everybody. Bye. Bye, Benita. Have a good night.
Thank you,
Okay.
Marilyn. Thank you for opening and monitoring.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you.